Hi.
Is it Cancel Lucy? Is
Yes,
that right?
yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jody Talber. I'm going to be the MC. Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thank you. Welcome to DOE.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure. I just was putting stuff out here. I can
Okay.
move it.
No, I don't know.
No.
You don't need to move it.
Sure.
No,
Okay.
you're fine.
I'm just
You're fine.
letting it out.
Yeah. So you've seen the program and you kind of know what we're doing here. So I'm just going to be really
Sure.
brief.
Sure.
We're going to play the national anthem. We'll ask people to stand. I'm going to introduce our director, and he actually asked that then I introduce you.
Okay.
So he'll come up, say a few words, go back, sit down,
Sure.
then I'll come up and introduce
Oh,
you.
that would be great.
Okay. And then I won't read your whole bio, but I'll,
Oh, yeah.
I'll,
Whatever.
do a few highlights.
Whatever.
Okay.
You should mention my book, though.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you said that.
It's coming up the holiday season.
Okay.
It's called Santa's Secret.
Yep.
I'm selling my book.
Do you want to tell me what it's about, or do you want to
Oh, yeah,
say what
really
it, okay.
quick.
Yeah, then let me just write this down.
It's a children's book. I was a professional, semi-professional Santa Claus for a long time.
Oh, okay.
But you can't tell. I've lost weight. I never really gained it, but and so I decided to write a book,
Okay.
and I dedicate it to my granddaughter.
Okay. Okay.
And it's not on the bestseller list, but it sells every year.
Okay.
But it's in Braille.
Oh, it's in Braille. Okay.
And it's registered at the Library of Congress.
Okay.
in
Is
Braille.
your granddaughter blind?
No.
No. Okay. It must be hard to find any books in Braille, right?
Well, it's in Braille and Spanish
Oh, okay.
in order to print.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'll leave you.
so we're gonna wait for some more people to come in.
Oh, yeah, I'm not gonna start.
And I'm sure, call them up and up.
Oh, sure,
For you.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Let's see.
Good morning, DOE. My name is Jody Tallbear. I'm the Chief of the Civil Rights Division, which is under the Office of Civil Rights and Diversity, under the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, and I'm happy to be your MC this morning. I'd like to welcome everyone here in the room and those across the complex that are joining via webcast to DOE's 2019 National Disability Employment Awareness Month program. Thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to be with us this morning to acknowledge the contributions that Americans with disabilities make to our country's workforce and economic strength. I'd like to provide you a brief overview of today's program. We're fortunate to have Mr. Anthony Cancelosi as our keynote speaker. Thank you, sir. Mr. Cancelosi is the Chief Executive Officer of the DC-based organization Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. Our program also features remarks from my boss, James Campos, the Director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, and also later in the program we'll be hearing from Brad Schaff, who is the very first Corporate Reasonable Accommodations Program Manager for DOE, and Brad will be joining us via webcast, or WebEx, I'm sorry. I do need to note one change to the printed program, or were we able to pick that up, Colette? I think we were able to pick it up, actually. We normally have someone singing the national anthem. We usually have a vocalist here, but she was unable to join us today. So we're actually just going to hear a recorded version of that. And I guess we can turn to that right now before I introduce Director Campos. So if I can please ask everyone to stand for the anthem. Can all be seated? At this time, I'd like to introduce James Campos, the Director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. Director Campos was nominated by President Trump and confirmed by the U.S. Senate in April of 2018 to be the Director of Economic Impact and Diversity. And I won't read James' bio, but it is in your program, and I invite you to read it and learn about James's many accomplishments. I will share with you, though, that in the role of Director of ED, James is the Chief Diversity Officer for the department. James.
Thank you, Jody. And good morning, and thank you for attending today's Disability Employment Awareness Month. It's truly an important month to celebrate this great opportunity to provide information and to provide awareness towards this month and towards the individuals that serve our country so valiantly. Each October, we celebrate the contributions of workers with disabilities and educate others about the value of a workforce inclusive of their skills and talents. It's a tribute to the accomplishments of the men and women with the disabilities whose work keeps the nation's economy strong. Reaffirming the commitment to ensure equal opportunity for all citizens. In other words, it is your job, it's our job to recruit the best team that we can. Now, the question is, would you rather have a pool of 100 qualified candidates to choose from or a pool of 1,000 qualified candidates to choose from? Diversity empowers us with a more robust talent pool. You don't win the World Series by filling a team roster with players that play in the same position. Of course, go Nats, great accomplishment. The bottom line is that in order to have a strong team, a winning team, you need people with diverse talents, abilities, and experiences. That's why we are here today to celebrate Disability Employment Awareness Month. In a recent policy statement, the Secretary Perry signed on the employment of people with disabilities. He encouraged all of us to remember the following. This nation has achieved its singular place in history, not by rejecting the contributions, talents, and attributes of people simply because they are different, but instead by embracing the strengths and that comes from a diversity of background, experience, and thought. That same strength needs to flow through the DOE. It is paramount and very important that we celebrate this great day. It is important to reassure and to provide an opportunity for all that are capable of performing the great work that we have here at the DOE, and how important it is that we make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity and access to these great jobs. We appreciate all the talent we have throughout the DOE, and I thank you very much for having this opportunity and providing me this honor to speak today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, James. At this time, I'd like to introduce Anthony Tony Cancelosi. Mr. Cancelosi was appointed the president and CEO of Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind in September 2005. Prior to joining Columbia Lighthouse, Tony was president of ICL, an international software company, and the CEO of several for-profit technology companies. He has also served as a chief operating officer for Key Systems, also now I think named Sylvan Learning. His nonprofit experience includes involvement with the International Center for the Disabled, National Kidney Foundation, and the Special Olympics. Some highlights of his community service, which is quite broad, is he served on the board of directors for the DC Police Foundation, the executive committee of the National Cherry Blossom Festival, and he's co-chair of the Capital Network Veterans Engagement Board. He also graduated from the FBI's Citizen Academy. Mr. Cancelosi was elected Man of the Year by the 2013 Lido Civic Club of Washington, D.C. And he also is the author of a children's book that he wrote in 2010 called Santa's Secret. It's a book that's in Braille, and the all book sales of that benefit his organization, Lighthouse for the Blind. With that, I'll welcome you to the stage, Mr. Cancelosi.
Last night was a very exciting evening, and if this is being broadcast across the country, and if you're in Houston, good play, but we won. So thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today because this is a very important month for anyone that has a disability, and because they become recognizable because of this special month. So I want to give you what I would call some attributes to what we are faced with in the community of people with disabilities to be employable. And I think it's very important for you to kind of gather up what I'm going to put out here so that you kind of see, and I'm not good at this stuff. Even though I was in the IT industry, I'll push the next button. Why is it not working? Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of introductions. I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics. And I think one of the real key things on this slide is the myths of how people are perceived with disabilities. And what are those myths? And then a scope of employability, which I think is very important, that we understand how many people with disabilities can be employed and why should they be employed. Why is it? This is not a highlight of my presentation here. This is not a highlight. Why? You told me to the left, right? Oh, okay, all right. No, okay. Okay. Yeah. In the middle. I think it's very important for you to know some of the demographics of how many people with disabilities in the United States. Not too many people recognize how many there are. When you start to look at the numbers here, there are almost 24 million people in the United States that are visually impaired or blind. That's an enormous number, and when you start to break it down, you start to realize that 24 million and are over the age of 18 are visually impaired and blind. And we're talking about a span of the working age of people that are visually impaired and blind. The National Institute defines impairment, in a lot of different ways. But if you're defined as being visually impaired, you're visually impaired. And that's what we work off of. There are we couldn't put a slide up for this, but there are 18 million people who are blind that are white, 3 million who are African American, 3 million are Latino Hispanic, 531,000 are Asian. But here's another breakdown. 14.4 million people who are visually impaired and blind are women. 5.3 are men. 16.4 million are between the ages of 18 and 64. I'm hoping you're starting to see the demographics of a community, and we're talking just about the visually impaired and blind. It's also the same kind of statistical data on the cognitive side of people with disabilities. So you have to start to look at, there's an enormous potential workforce out there if there are training programs and accessibility to jobs. So I want to give you that kind of flavor because it's really important, because this study was done 5 years ago. It's increased even more. Why has it increased? Because of diabetic retinopathy, diabetes, obesity. And if you're trending this right now, and I don't want to frighten anybody out there, but these numbers can go up to 30 million, 35 million. But more importantly, it could affect the 18 and older ages. And so we're following this very, very carefully. 13 million are married, 2.7 are widowed, 4 million are divorced or separated. You might say, where are you coming up with all this data? Well, if we don't have this data, we don't know the demographics of how we can train people or get them interested into training programs to get jobs. You've got to have the data. And so when you start to look at all of this, you start to say, what is the income potential of people with a disability? And why is it out there? So we did a very strong analysis here that I think is very important for you to know. 9.1 million have a family income of less than $35,000. And people here who live in Washington and other locations, how could you afford a house in Washington, D.C. if you're making $35,000 a year? You just can't. 2.9 million have family incomes between $35,000 and $50,000. 1.6 million have income between $75,000 and $100,000. 2.9 million have family income over $100,000. So when you start to build this number up, you start to see there is a contribution of people with disabilities of earning an income. And we can give you a lot more statistics, but I want to define the barriers to entry for people with disabilities. I got it right. And I want to try to dispel some of these myths that come about. When you can read this, I can go through it, but for example, walking, thinking, understanding, seeing or speaking or hearing are a lot of the issues that people with disabilities might have. And how do they overcome that? Defining a disability, medical disability exists in the body, a deficit or a loss. Social disability exists in society, culture, and a way of being. And when you think about a hybrid, each disability has both a medical component and a social component. What we're heading towards to lead you up to employability is these are the things that people see or hear when they think of somebody with a disability. what are the common myths of a person with a disability? Now, usually my presentations are much more dynamic, right? I don't want to put anybody to sleep, but I had to give this. I was forced to give this by my staff. So, and she's sitting here. But anyway, these are the things you have to hear before I get to the exciting part, more exciting parts about employability. Our beliefs guide how we view and treat people with disabilities. How often do we hear somebody has a disability and we are cautious about meeting that person or meeting that person? That's a human instinct that we say, well, what kind of disability do they have? Oh, well, they stutter or they do this. And all of a sudden, you're on guard of how you're going to treat that person. A lot of these beliefs are based on inaccurate or insufficient information, because that's not absolutely true. Myths and misconceptions are perpetuated inappropriate actions or interactions. This is a real important. How do we determine somebody who works for you, and you have to determine about their performance? We all have performance appraisals and so forth. A myth that people have is that people who have disabilities have lower job performance. In 1990, DuPont conducted a survey, and it clearly shows that people with disabilities can perform beyond what people think they can do. And that's really important to start thinking about how important that is. Now this one I really can zero in on, because we also have employees, over 100 and some employees, and I can tell you the ones that come to work are the ones with the disabilities, and they're always there. So performance is not what I would say is a myth, and is a myth of people with disabilities. And it's clearly shown here. This is one I think that has to be clearly looked at, because the studies that prove this, it's not accurate. When you think about somebody with a disability, what do you think about? What are the accommodations that we have to have? And everybody said, that's going to cost us money. It's going to cost us time of other employees working to help them. Well, study proves that most workers do not really need special accommodations, and if they do, the next part of it is studies by the President's Committee on Job Accommodations Network are shown that 15% of accommodations cost nothing, 51% cost between $1 and $500, 12% cost between $501 and $1,000, and 22% cost more than $1,000. Now, if we start to think about how much it costs us to train our own internal employees, that is very little to get somebody at a level that I think will produce what they say they're going to produce. One more, let's see. Scope of employability. And here's where I really want to get into is that technology today has brought about the ability to take people with disabilities and give them the productivity and the skills and the training. Just alone in IT technology, we can put together a complete package for anyone with a visually impairment or blindness to be just productive as anyone else. A great advertisement, but by, and I won't mention the name of the organization, But they sent out a flyer, and on the flyer, you opened it up, and there was this young man sitting at a computer. And when you opened up the next level, there was a seeing eye dog at his feet. That kind of said, what you see, not necessarily, is somebody with a disability. So that is one of the big things about technology. Most organizations provide the training that's necessary for people with disabilities. The most important part about any organization that serves people with disabilities is that do not send anybody out into the community that's not fully trained and have job skills. There's organizations that, well, I work with the veterans, that we've trained veterans in jobs that are more than $50,000, $60,000 a year. And some of them are as high as $100,000. So that's really important to understand, that the people with disabilities can fill jobs that everybody else can have. So when we start to think about what is in the workforce, many, many years ago, when there was a shortage of people to be employed, where did employers turn to? They turned to the disabilities community to look and see what people with disabilities can fill jobs that they had. And I think that is something that we are going to be faced with in the next generation, because there will not be enough people to fill all the jobs that are out there, but people with disabilities can be part of that, filling those jobs. And I'll just give you a little statistic that I think is really very essential to understand, is that people with disabilities, depending on where they have or obtain their disability, can be productive at the highest levels, even in the 20, 22, 23-year age and higher. We have veterans that now that are 50, 60 want to be employed again, that have disabilities, and we're doing that now. So employability is a very key thing for people with disabilities, to let the community know that there are training programs for those jobs. And that is statistically known, and we can prove that. So where are we going with all this for employability with people with disabilities, and for this month of people with disabilities? It's about awareness. How many of us are aware of how people with disabilities retrained themselves? We were out here this morning talking about a person that escorted us in and said his brother was blind. And when he, in his 20s or 30s, he turned blind, he lost his sight. But he became employable. And he's working in a government job, very employable. And he said he's getting married, all these good things that are happening to somebody with disability that I don't think anybody recognizes that can happen for people with disabilities. So I guess for me to be up here and giving all the statistics and all that is what I want to emphasize across the board, is that we've been doing this, I've been doing this for 14 years, and I'm starting to recognize the fact that if we don't create the accessibility and the training programs that are necessary for people with disabilities, we're going to have a lack in the workforce, but more people that will go into poverty. And we can't afford to have them go into poverty, because they can be trained. We know for sure that we've trained veterans to do a lot of different new things for them using technology. So for me, it's something that we're going to continue to do. All the statistics lead to one thing, that people with disabilities have the ability to learn and train and go into jobs. So I can go on, and last night was a great night, and I went to bed anyway. Usually I'm much more exciting than this, but anyway. But I really appreciate being here today, because I think that, more importantly, that people who are interested in helping other people are going to be there forever, and the next generation has to pick that up. And in dealing with a lot of veterans right now, that are unemployable in some cases, but they become employable if they know that there's a way for them to gain a better job versus where they're working at different places that are not giving them more than minimum wage. So that's the other part, is that we can't afford to put people into jobs with disabilities at a minimum wage. But you have to train them. They have to have the skills. It's like in our organization, you have to be, accountable for what you do. And I think we have people who, once they learn and get into a job, they're going to be dedicated. We have a lot of people that come to work in snowstorms. They show up. I thought, okay, this is great. But I know a lot of our other employees say, wow, they're a good example for them. So I think moving forward is that what you're doing here at Department of Energy of recognizing this month is crucial. It sends a message to a lot of other people, and I think that's really important. And people like, we were last night at an event with Metro, and what Metro's doing now is giving people more accessibility to get to work with Metro Access and so forth. So I think the teaming up of the government agencies and what you're doing here gives other people the ability to say, yes, we're going to help people with disabilities. So I thank you, and I hope I gave you enough, more on the statistical side. The thing that we are concerned about is the increased numbers of younger people losing their sight through diabetes and diabetic retinopathy. And that's a generation that we don't want to have vision loss, because they still will be working in a long time, and they're going to need the skills and all to do that. So thank you.
Can I ask you a question while you still have your mic?
Sure.
Why is the rate of blindness so much higher for women than men?
I'm sorry?
Why is the rate for blindness so much higher for women than men?
It's a good question, and one of them is diabetes. If you start to look at some of the things that the research that we're doing right now, we're doing research with the working age, 18 to 64, even goes up higher now. And we're finding that there's more concern about children that are born visually impaired and they're obese through the ages of 5, 6, and 7. And this was a study done by a 2-star general who's on our board, and she's a big advocate for this, and that's kind of scary. And so when you start to think about women, that's a big number. It's a huge number, and it's increasing. And it has a lot to do with diabetes and even glaucoma. We run clinics, and one of the an event we just did, we screened 25 patients and found 3 people with glaucoma. That's enormous. And so that's a big statistic. It's more about how you recover from that. And one of the things with blindness is that we feel that it's not a death sentence, and so people can be trained and retrained. And I know we can't talk about all the things we do, but I can tell you that we've been around 120 years. I didn't say that in the beginning, did I? I should tell everybody out there who's listening, we've been around 120 years. So that's significant when you start to think about how we've evolved and how technology has given us the opportunity to train more people into more productive jobs. And that's really important. And the government agencies love us too. There's no reason why we can't work together even more. But what you're doing here today, and I hope I did a good job to a certain extent, that you understand what it's all about. And it's all about employability.
I know we have mics set up for
Sure.
Q&A for reasonable accommodations, but does anyone have any questions for Mr. Campos before he leaves the stage? I know that I have one more question. What do you do? I can just imagine when someone does go blind, how traumatic
Sure.
that must be for them emotionally.
Sure.
Does your organization serve them in that
Sure.
way? Can you
Sure.
talk about that?
Yeah, we have a program, and we work with a lot of state and local agencies. We have clinics We do all kinds of screenings and so forth. But one of the things is we have a program that when somebody's identified losing their sight, what I should point out, there are more people losing their sight, not from birth, but older. And so we have a program that we have a facility where you come and we define what your blindness is and what level it is. And it's a condominium, and we teach you how to cook, how to clean. That's another thing we teach, clean. But we also teach you how to ride metro. We teach you how to navigate independently. And what we're finding is that part of it is crucial to give them that renewing their life again without sight. And that renewing without sight is enormous. But we have a program that takes you all through that, and it's continued. So that's something that we do across the board. And it's very important to do. Sure.
Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for talking today. My name is Nathan Grosh. I'm a contractor with Accenture Federal Services. And I just had a question that I'm hopeful you did a great job of talking about the community as a whole, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind does currently, and maybe focus, because you spend a lot of time on different topics and different things that you are interested in so far as health, so far as preventing blindness, and I was wondering if you could talk about what your focus is with Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, specifically, like next 5 years, are you working towards spending more money and spending more time on health advocacy to prevent later onset blindness, or are you devoting more time to helping the community that currently exists? What kind of is the focus going forward? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. There's 3 steps to what we try to do. Is if we work with children that are born blind and all the way up to the ages of 5, and then we track them all the way up through teenage years and so forth for education and so forth. We run 3 aspects. One, we run clinical services so that we can determine when we see somebody who has some vision issues, that we can determine what their vision loss is and help them with a program to get them doing the things they have to do. Second is when we deal with individuals who are already have lost their sight, we have programs that take them in to do independent living skills, orientation, mobility, travel training. And then the other aspect of it is when we're working with people that we meet that have lost their sight. And I can give you one example is that in the several conflicts that we've had more than about 10% of veterans who've been wounded are blind because of head injuries and so forth. So we work with them once they go through their rehabilitation. We work with them to train them into job opportunities. And we have training programs to teach them how to do those new jobs. But we give them the tools, the technology, the computers, the software, everything. So technology has evolved around all the things that we do now that make it more confident level of people who are visually impaired to do more than what they think they can do. And then we just continue this. I mean, it's a cycle. We serve from birth to death because we work with seniors and older individuals who need our services, because inclusion is an issue, so we can get them out of just being isolated.
Thank you. I'm actually glad you brought up inclusion. I have one more question.
Sure.
It's okay. Because I was curious about how mental health factors into all this, because obviously that's a huge part about quality of life, and it's often that we talk about the economics of employment, but I was curious moving forward, because in all of this, you'd mentioned just inclusion right now and kind of quality of life with mental health. So how does mental health factor into all of your work? The mental health of the community. How does, do you have any statistics on how being employed versus being unemployed affects the mental health of the blind community, or even less severe than that, just how your effect upon the community as the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind affects the mental health?
Yeah, it does. It does to a level from a health standpoint. Is that what your question basically is?
Yeah, just trying to get into quality of life.
Yeah. the quality of life, for all of us is quite different, sighted or not sighted. But I think one of the things is that there's a support. We go out into the communities where we do programs and support programs for individuals. We'll go to managed care facilities. We have a medical van that goes out into the community to provide services. There's been a lot of studies done on reference to people who become isolated and lonely that can shorten their life by 5 years. So one of the things we do is we kind of bring them out of that through our clinicians and so forth that we serve people to do that. And we give them the opportunities to have other things that we do, like events that we do. And we were just talking about an event we're doing for blind artists. The last 2 years we've had an art festival, and we've recruited individuals who are visually impaired and blind who are artists. And I can't say you're all welcome to come, but that gets people more engaged back into the community. And we have a young man who's a jazz pianist. So we're working to let people know what they can do, but it's the healthcare side that we watch very carefully, especially on the mental health side. So we have consultants that do that, doctors. We have a group of 52 doctors who work with us on our vans and so forth for clinical services. And so we have a lot of that. That's crucial to the embodiment of the individual with vision loss.
Thank you.
Welcome. Oh, okay. That's right, I'll clean it up later.
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Cancelosi. I'm embarrassed to say that I've fallen prey to some of the myths that you just dispelled for me. And I think every time, and it hasn't been that many, maybe 2 or 3 presentations I've been to that talk about people with disabilities, it's mind-blowing to me. I think the diversity conversation a lot of times is kind of focused on ethnic and racial diversity, and there's not as much conversation about people with disabilities. So for me, I always learn a great deal. So thank you very much. At this time in our program, we're gonna shift to learning about DOE's Reasonable Accommodation Program. But before I introduce Brad Schaff, I'd like to call your attention to a policy statement that's within the program that you have. There was a policy statement that was issued by Secretary Perry in August of 2019, and this statement on the employment and advancement of persons with disabilities outlines DOE's commitment to providing all the benefits and privileges of meaningful work to people with disabilities that non-disabled DOE employees have. The statement discusses what a reasonable accommodation and personal assistance services are, and I know Brad will explain those in great detail to us. But I do encourage everyone to, especially those in leadership, to read the Secretary's statement in full. The Secretary has laid out very high expectations for DOE managers and employees as it relates to providing a welcoming environment for employees with disabilities. And so at this time, I'd like to welcome Brad Schaff. Brad is the first and only Reasonable Accommodation Program Manager that DOE has had. You'll see his bio in there. He may actually be the best possible candidate that DOE could have picked for this position. He has 20 plus years legal experience focused on healthcare law, equal opportunity, and civil rights. But I think his expertise for this position, I think, is best summed up in a quote that's in the program that I'd like to read for you. Brad says, "As a disabled veteran, I know from experience that the opportunity to successfully perform meaningful work and to provide for oneself can be an incredibly powerful and positive force in a person's life. I believe the principles of reasonable accommodation and personal assistance services and equal opportunity are all about providing an opportunity for success." So at this time, I'd like to ask Brad to chime in. Are you there, Brad? Your picture's on the screen, so we can see you.
Great.
So take it away.
Jody.
Okay.
Well, that's exactly the perfect place to start is that quote, because that's how I approach the program that I'm managing. But before I get into that, I just want to add my thanks to Mr. Campos for his excellent remarks, and to Director Campos for opening up the program and highlighting a couple points from the policy statement. And I want to add my encouragement for everyone listening. Thank you for being there or being online or listening to this at a later point or watching the video. But, you know, it behooves everyone to know what the guiding policy is, because it goes directly to each employee's rights. So, you know, I wanna, before I start talking about the DOE reasonable accommodation and PAS program, it's just good to take a couple minutes and explain what it is that we're talking about. Reasonable accommodations are those changes to the job environment. Could be physical layout, it could be adaptive equipment, could be a change in a schedule, time telework in certain applications and situations. But most, and I think Mr. Van Schofield does this too, most accommodations are very low cost.
As you see, we're kind of nearing the end of our allotted hour here, and so I'm just gonna, we did want to offer people the chance to ask Brad questions, but we're out of time. And so I'm just gonna ask that you can definitely email him questions if you have questions about reasonable accommodation, personnel assistant services, or any of the upcoming trainings. So thank you very much, Brad. At this time, I'm going to invite Mr. Canceloni and Director Campos back up. We do have a small token of our appreciation that we'd like to give to you. And I think James has something that he wants to say.
Please, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending here in person and also out there in TV world, so to speak. It is so important that we get out there and speak about this very important aspect to our workforce and to allow individuals to know that there's always a place for qualified individuals to be here and work at the Department of Energy. And it's an honor to have you, sir. It's an honor that what you bring forth and the information you have. It's so vital that we do a better job in expressing our needs, your needs, and how we can accommodate each other. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And we'd like to offer you this certificate of appreciation for your time here this morning, and if we could just take a photo as well. Do you want us to move that way, or do you want us to move that way? We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Oh, you have nice.
Thank you. Oh, no. Well, veterans is pretty important for us, so we employ quite a few.
Thank you.
I couldn't say all these things. Sure.
Well, that's actually important because I started veterans within the office.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Okay.
so we do also veterans.
Yeah, okay.
So that'd be great to connect with you on that because that's an issue we're trying to expand and
Yeah.
grow.
Oh, yeah, we can do it. There's two of us, secretaries that have a private-public board for the VA, and I'm vice chair with a guy named Charles Anderson, who is commissioner of the Purple Heart Foundation. So
Oh,
we'll
fantastic.
give you my card.
Yeah.
We'll let you know, so because that's crucial for us because quite a few blind veterans.
No,
We're with the Blind
absolutely.
Veterans of America,
Yeah.
too. Joe Bogart, who's a veteran, too.
So what do you do in the Reagan administration?
I was in technology,
Okay.
CTAC.
Okay.
Mic is on.
That's a long time ago, so.